The wedding ring sat on the nightstand, catching the moonlight in a sliver of cold, hard gold. It was a heavy circle, resting there like an anchor, but it felt more like a shackle than a promise. I stared at it from the edge of the bed, the metal dulling under the dim light, a constant reminder of the life that had vanished. Before we continue, if you love powerful, real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join the channel. I was Amanda, and for months, this silence had been my only companion. I moved through the rooms with a deliberate, measured pace. Every surface in the bedroom was still, untouched, holding the ghost of a routine that no longer existed. I reached out, my fingers hovering just inches from the gold, but I did not touch it. I could not. The air in the room felt stagnant, heavy with the weight of things left unsaid. Outside, the wind brushed against the glass, a soft, rhythmic scratching. I was trapped in the stillness, waiting for a change. I left the bedroom and walked into the living room, where the light was warmer, softer. Maya was on the rug, surrounded by a sprawl of wooden blocks. She was building a tower, her small hands moving with a focus that made the rest of the world seem distant. The rhythmic click of wood against wood filled the space, a steady, grounding sound that finally pushed back against the suffocating quiet of the house. I watched her for a long moment, leaning against the doorframe, letting the simple normalcy of the scene settle over me. It was the first time in weeks the air didn't feel heavy. She hummed to herself, a tuneless, wandering melody, while she carefully balanced a red block atop the structure. I felt my shoulders drop, the tension finally beginning to ebb. I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. Then, the clicking stopped. Maya froze, her hand still hovering near the tower, and slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes were wide, fixed on my face. I walked toward her, my footsteps muffled by the rug, but she didn't look away. Her eyes were glassy, reflecting the dim light of the lamps, and she seemed to be looking through me, rather than at me. I knelt down, the joints in my knees popping in the sudden quiet. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but she pulled away, her movements sharp and jerky. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me, her small hands trembling as she gripped the edge of a wooden block. She leaned in, her voice barely a breath, a thin sound that cut through the room like a blade. "Mommy," she whispered, and the word hung in the air, heavy and jagged. "Uncle Minjun said if I tell you about the basement, he won't bring me any more toys." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my skin cold and tight. I wanted to ask her what she meant, to demand an explanation, but the words stuck in my throat. Maya didn't wait for a response. She looked down at the blocks, her shoulders hunching, and she began to dismantle the tower with frantic, aimless motions. The secret was out. A shadow stretched across the floorboards before he even stepped into the light. Minjun stood in the doorway, his presence filling the frame with a sudden, suffocating weight. He smiled, the expression lifting his lips, but the movement stopped well short of his eyes. Those eyes remained flat, hard, and utterly vacant, like polished stones resting in a dark pool. He took a step forward, his movements fluid and precise, entirely at odds with the frantic energy Maya had just displayed. He looked at the scattered blocks, then at me, his head tilting with a practiced, gentle curiosity. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice smooth, lacking any edge or hesitation. I stood up, my pulse drumming against my throat, the sound loud enough in my own ears that I feared he might hear it. I watched his hand move to his side, his fingers tapping a rapid, rhythmic beat against his thigh, a nervous, repetitive motion that betrayed the calm facade. He didn't wait for my answer. He kept walking, closing the distance between us, his gaze sweeping over the room with a clinical, detached interest. Every step he took toward Maya felt like a violation of the space. I stood frozen, the memory of his arrival 6 months ago flooding my mind. I saw him standing in my kitchen, the morning after the funeral, quietly stacking dishes and brewing coffee while I sat in the dark. He had been a steady hand in a world that had suddenly gone hollow. I remembered the way he handled the utility bills, the way he sat on the floor with Maya for hours, teaching her how to build towers that reached the ceiling. He had filled the silence of my grief with a deliberate, calculated warmth. He had been the one to fix the leaky faucet, the one to drive us to the store when the car wouldn't start. Every memory was a brick in a wall I had built around him, a fortress of gratitude that now felt like a cage. I looked at him again, trying to overlay that helpful, gentle man onto the person standing before me now. The contrast made my head spin. I gripped the back of the chair, my knuckles white, fighting the urge to lean into the familiar comfort of his presence. My mind raced, clawing for reasons to dismiss Maya's words as a child's misunderstanding. I wanted to believe the kindness was real, that the man who had saved me from the wreckage of my life could not be the source of this new, suffocating fear. I stood trapped between the ghost of his past actions and the cold, hard reality of the present moment. He reached out, his hand extending toward Maya with a slow, deliberate grace. The movement was practiced, the kind of gesture meant to soothe. But it had the opposite effect. As his fingers neared her hair, I saw it. Maya did not just move away, she flinched. Her entire body jerked, a sharp, involuntary contraction. She pulled her shoulder toward her ear and tucked her chin down, shielding herself as if expecting a blow. The movement was tiny, a flicker of muscle and bone, but it hit me with the force of a physical impact. My breath caught in my throat, turning into a jagged, shallow gasp. The wall of gratitude I had built around him, the fortress of memories that had kept my doubts at bay, crumbled in that single second. I saw the way her eyes darted to the side, searching for an exit, her small hands trembling against the carpet. There was no mistaking the terror in her posture. It was not the shyness of a child. It was the instinct of a creature cornered by a predator. The silence in the room shifted, turning from heavy to lethal. I looked at Min Jun, and for the first time, the mask of the helpful neighbor dissolved. I saw the calculation behind his gaze. The denial that had blinded me for months vanished. My pulse drummed against my throat, a frantic, uneven rhythm that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. I stepped forward, putting myself between him and my daughter. The air felt thick, charged with the static of a storm about to break. I forced my voice to remain steady, though my lungs burned with the effort of holding back a scream. "What basement, Maya?" I asked. My eyes locked onto his. I did not look away. I watched his face for the slightest tremor, the smallest crack in his composure. Min Jun laughed. It was a smooth, practiced sound, the kind of easy chuckle he used to diffuse tension at dinner parties or during casual weekend chats. He tilted his head, his expression shifting into one of mild, patronizing amusement. "She has such an imagination, Amanda," he said. "We were just playing hide and seek. You know how children get when they find a good hiding spot." He spoke as if he were explaining a simple fact. I felt the heat rising in my chest, a cold, sharp anger that pushed past the fear. He was trying to rewrite the moment, to bury the truth. He reached out again, his fingers extended toward her hair, but the movement triggered a violent response. Maya did not just pull back, she scrambled. Her heels dug into the rug, kicking up dust and friction as she propelled herself backward. Her hand swept out, catching the edge of her block tower. The wooden pieces clattered against the floor, a sharp, chaotic sound that echoed through the room like gunfire. She hit the wall and stopped, her chest heaving, her eyes locked onto his hand as if it were a weapon. The sudden noise seemed to freeze time. Min Jun's hand remained suspended in the air, fingers curled slightly, his expression unchanging, even as the blocks lay scattered in a jagged line between us. I watched the space he had occupied, the distance he had just tried to bridge, now transformed into a no man's land. Maya's breath came in ragged, wet hitches, and she did not look at me. She kept her gaze fixed on him, her entire frame trembling with a primal, instinctual fear. The illusion of the kind neighbor had finally shattered, leaving only the cold, hard reality of the danger he posed to my child. The room remained frozen. Maya stayed pressed against the baseboard, her knuckles white as she gripped the carpet. I stopped looking at her and turned my head toward Min Jun. He had not moved to help her. He had not apologized for the mess. He stood perfectly still, his weight balanced evenly on both feet. Then, I saw it. His right hand hung at his side, and his index finger began to tap against the fabric of his pant leg. It was a rapid, uneven rhythm. I watched the finger strike the cloth, over and over, a steady beat that seemed to pulse in time with the thumping in my own ears. I had seen this motion a dozen times before, at dinner, or while he sat on the sofa, Now, the tapping looked like a countdown. His jaw tightened, the muscle beneath his skin bunching as he stared at the scattered blocks. He did not look at me, but his rhythm accelerated, the fingers striking harder, faster. The air between us vibrated with the sound of that small, persistent strike. He eventually turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps silent on the carpet. I remained standing exactly where he left me, my gaze fixed on the empty doorway. My mind raced back through the last 6 months. I recalled the way he appeared at my door the week after the funeral, holding groceries I had not asked for. I remembered the keys he insisted on keeping for emergencies, and the way he always positioned himself between me and the exit during our conversations. I had categorized these actions as helpful, as signs of a man filling the void left by my husband. Now, each memory played back with a different texture. The groceries were a way to monitor my pantry. The keys were a way to bypass my locks. The positioning was a way to control my movement. I had spent months ignoring the friction in my gut, convincing myself that my hesitation was merely the lingering ghost of my own grief. I had been a willing participant in my own deception, smoothing over the jagged edges of his behavior to maintain a false sense of domestic order. I looked down at my hands, shaking slightly, and realized how much I had surrendered to a stranger. I had traded my intuition for comfort, and in doing so, I had invited the threat directly into the center of my home. The house settled into a heavy, suffocating silence once the front door clicked shut. I did not move for a long time, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen. It sounded like a hammer against the floorboards. I walked into Maya's room, my feet avoiding the creaky spots in the hallway. She was curled under her quilt, her breathing steady and deep. I watched her chest rise and fall for several minutes, confirming she was truly asleep. I backed out of the room and returned to the living area. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting long, thin shadows across the carpet. I stood in the center of the room, my hands clenched into tight fists at my sides. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting the seconds until my pulse leveled out. The kitchen light was off, leaving the house in a dim, gray haze. I walked to the counter and gripped the edge of the granite. My knuckles turned white under the pressure. I looked toward the hallway that led to the basement door. The darkness there seemed thicker, more absolute than the rest of the house. I took a deep breath, held it, and let the silence sharpen my resolve. It was time to see what was hidden beneath the floor. I moved toward the kitchen island, my footsteps muffled by the rug. The counter was cold under my palms. I reached into the ceramic bowl where he kept his loose change and spare items. My fingers brushed against the metal key. It was heavier than I expected, the jagged teeth biting into my skin as I gripped it tight. I pulled it out and held it up to the sliver of moonlight. The brass glinted, a sharp contrast to the shadows surrounding me. I stood perfectly still, listening. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling, then fading into the distance. The silence returned, deeper than before. I tucked the key into my pocket and turned toward the hallway. My movements were measured, deliberate. I reached the threshold of the basement stairs and stopped. The door stood before me, a slab of dark wood that had been off limits for months. I reached out, my hand trembling as I brought the key toward the lock. The metal felt ice cold. I slid the key into the slot, the mechanism clicking softly. I gripped the brass handle and prepared to twist the key. I expected the resistance of a deadbolt, the mechanical grind of a lock that had been sealed for months. I applied pressure, bracing my shoulder against the frame, but there was no resistance. The handle turned with a sickeningly smooth motion, and the door drifted inward before I could even engage the lock. It did not swing wide. It stopped at a narrow, jagged angle. A sliver of darkness peered out from the gap, a vertical line of shadow that seemed to breathe. I pulled my hand back as if burned. The key, still held tightly in my palm, felt suddenly heavy and pointless. I stared at the opening. It was barely wide enough for a person, yet it felt like a gaping wound in the wall. I leaned closer, my ear inches from the wood, listening for any sound from the depths below. Nothing. Just the faint, stale scent of trapped air leaking out into the hallway. The fact that the door was already ajar hit me harder than any locked barrier could have. It meant he had been here. It meant the boundary I had respected for months had been violated long before I arrived. I stood paralyzed, watching the door frame, waiting for the shadows to shift. I pushed the door fully open. It swung back with a low, rhythmic creak that echoed through the empty hallway. I took a breath, gripped the door frame, and placed my right foot on the first step. The wood groaned under my weight, a sharp, splintering protest that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I froze, waiting for a reaction from upstairs, but the silence remained absolute. I descended, one slow step at a time. The air changed as I moved deeper. It grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, and something sharp, like rusted metal. My fingers trailed along the wall, finding only rough, cold concrete and patches of peeling paint. Halfway down, I stopped. My lungs felt tight, as if the oxygen were being squeezed out. I leaned my forehead against the cool, damp wood of the banister. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my boots hitting the concrete floor with a thud. The darkness here was absolute, a physical weight. I clicked the flashlight on. The beam cut through the gloom, turning the dust motes into dancing sparks of light. The basement was a graveyard of old moving boxes, stacked in uneven, teetering towers that reached toward the low ceiling. I moved forward, my boots crunching on grit. The light flickered, casting long, erratic shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. I pushed past a stack of crates, the cardboard soft and damp from the humidity. Behind them, the space opened into a narrow, cramped alcove. My light swept over a pile of discarded blankets, and then stopped. Tucked deep into the corner, resting on a concrete ledge, was a small metal briefcase. It was clean, entirely free of the dust that coated everything else in this room. My heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against my ribs. I stepped closer, the air feeling suddenly colder. The briefcase was locked, its surface dull and matte, looking entirely out of place. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches from the handle, and felt a jolt of pure, cold adrenaline. This was not something forgotten. This was something kept. I knelt on the cold concrete, the dampness seeping instantly into my knees. My hands were trembling, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that made the screwdriver feel heavy and clumsy. I wedged the flat tip into the seam of the lock. It was stubborn, the metal biting back against the steel tool. I leaned my weight into it, gritting my teeth, feeling the resistance strain my wrists. The briefcase didn't budge. I pulled back, wiped my palms against my legs, and tried again, this time angling the tip deeper into the mechanism. I heard a faint, metallic click, but the latch held firm. I took a steadying breath, closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, and pushed with everything I had. The metal shrieked, a high, piercing sound that tore through the basement silence like a blade. I jumped, the noise echoing off the low ceiling, terrified that the sound had traveled up the stairs. It hadn't. The latch gave way, the lid popping up just enough to reveal the dark interior. I pulled the lid back fully, the hinges groaning in protest. My flashlight beam hit the contents, and for a second, my brain refused to process the shapes. I reached in, my fingers brushing against the stiff, textured edges of booklets. I pulled one out, a passport. It was worn at the corners, the gold lettering on the cover slightly faded. I opened it. A photo of Minjun stared back at me, but the name underneath was not his. I flipped the page. A different country, a different name, the same face. My breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound in the confined space. I grabbed another, then another, spreading them out on the damp concrete. They were all him. A dozen identities, a dozen lives, all neatly stacked in a metal box. I traced the ink on one of the pages, the paper cold and crisp under my thumb. There was no logic to it, no pattern I could discern, only the terrifying consistency of his gaze in every single portrait. The man I had let into my home, the man who had held my daughter, did not exist. He was a ghost built from ink and stolen names, a collection of masks kept in a basement, waiting for the right moment to be worn. I pushed the passports aside, my hands shaking so violently that the booklet slid across the floor. Beneath them lay a thick stack of photographs held together by a rubber band. I pulled the band off, the snap echoing in the small space. The first photo was of my house, taken from the street at night. I recognized the porch light, the specific angle of the driveway. I flipped to the next. It was me, sitting at my desk in my office, taken through the glass of the window. I could see the stack of papers I had been working on that day. My blood turned to ice. I fumbled through the rest, my vision blurring. There was a photo of me at the grocery store, another of me walking Maya to the park, and one that stopped my heart entirely. It was a picture of me sleeping in my own bed, the angle taken from the doorway of my room. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. Every moment of my life over the last 6 months had been observed, catalogued, and stored in this box. The flashlight beam trembled, casting erratic shadows against the damp foundation walls. I could not move. My muscles felt as though they had turned to lead, anchored to the cold concrete floor. Every breath I drew felt shallow, a desperate attempt to pull oxygen into lungs that seemed to have forgotten their rhythm. The photographs were still spread out before me, a mosaic of my own life stolen and reassembled by a stranger. I stared at the image of myself sleeping, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical impact. He had been there, inches away, while I was at my most defenseless. The air in the basement grew thick, tasting of stagnant earth and old, metallic rot. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled, forcing me to catch myself on the edge of the metal briefcase. The sharp corner bit into my palm, but I barely registered the pain. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the man who played with my daughter with the predator who had catalogued my every movement. The silence of the house above felt suddenly, terrifyingly absolute. The stillness was broken by a sound so mundane it felt like a gunshot. Above me, the heavy thud of the front door closing echoed through the floorboards. Then came the distinct, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the blood rushing in my ears. He was home. The realization cut through my paralysis, replacing shock with a sharp, cold clarity. I was no longer just a victim of his surveillance. I was now cornered in the very foundation of the house he had infiltrated. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, and heavy. They moved across the entryway, then paused. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he headed toward the kitchen. Every creak of the wood felt like a countdown. I looked at the dark, narrow stairs leading up to the main floor, then back at the small, high window near the ceiling. There was no way out through the main house now. The space around me, once a place of hidden truth, had become a cage. He was moving toward the basement door. The handle began to turn. The basement door handle rattled, a slow, rhythmic testing of the lock that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I had to hide the evidence. I lunged for the scattered passports, my fingers clumsy and shaking as I shoved them back into the metal briefcase. The photos of me, taken in my own home, fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. I snatched them up, jamming them into the case alongside the false identities. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps that seemed far too loud in the confined space. I pressed the lid down, my palms sweating against the cold steel, but the latch was jammed. I pushed harder, desperate to snap the lock shut before he reached the stairs. My grip slipped. The metal hinge groaned under the pressure, then let out a sharp, high-pitched screech that tore through the basement air. I froze, my hands still locked onto the case, staring up at the ceiling. The footsteps above stopped instantly. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until it was sliced by a sound that made my skin crawl. It was not a shout of anger or a demand for explanation. It was a calm, measured inquiry that drifted down the stairwell like smoke. "Amanda." His voice was terrifyingly steady, lacking any hint of the rage I expected to hear. It sounded like he was greeting me in the kitchen on a normal morning. "Why are you down there?" The question hung in the damp air, a predatory probe designed to see if I would break or lie. I gripped the briefcase so hard the metal bit into my palms, leaving deep indentations. He knew. He had to know. The way he spoke suggested he was already anticipating my next move, waiting for me to scramble like a trapped animal. I did not answer. I shifted my weight, my boots scraping against the concrete, and he went silent again, listening. The pieces of the last 6 months clicked into place with a sickening, mechanical precision. Every act of kindness, every shared meal, every moment he spent playing with Maya, it was not comfort. It was data collection. He had not entered our lives to heal my grief. He had arrived to measure it, to see exactly how much vulnerability he could exploit. I looked down at the photos in the case, my hands trembling as I traced the grain of the paper. He had been watching me from the shadows of my own life, waiting for the precise moment I would be too broken to notice the predator in my home. The realization hit me like a physical weight, cold and absolute. He was not a man who had lost his way. He was a hunter who had spent his life perfecting the art of the trap. The grief that had defined my existence for months suddenly evaporated, replaced by a sharp, crystalline instinct to survive. I was no longer the mourning widow he had targeted. I was a mother with a secret that could destroy him. I stood up, the briefcase heavy against my thigh, and the fear that had paralyzed me moments ago hardened into a singular, cold resolve. I snapped the metal briefcase shut. The sound was a sharp, final crack that echoed against the damp foundation walls. I did not wait for the echo to die. I pulled the handle tight against my chest, feeling the sharp edges of the case dig into my ribs. It was heavy, weighted with the proof of his obsession, but it was my only leverage now. I scanned the perimeter of the basement, ignoring the shadows that seemed to pulse in the periphery. My eyes locked onto the small, rectangular frame of the coal chute window near the ceiling. It was high, narrow, and choked with years of grime, but it was the only way out that did not lead back to him. I moved toward the back wall, my boots silent on the cold concrete. Every muscle in my legs coiled, ready to spring. I reached out and gripped the rusted iron latch of the chute. It was seized with corrosion, unyielding under my first desperate pull. The latch was open, but the world outside remained a distant, unreachable promise. I stood on my tiptoes, one hand gripping the frame of the coal chute, the other pressed firmly against the briefcase. Then, the sound started. It was not the hurried pace of a man searching for a misplaced item. It was a slow, rhythmic thud against the wooden stairs above. Each step was deliberate, calculated, and heavy. The old timber groaned under his weight, a long, drawn-out protest that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. I pressed my back against the damp concrete wall, holding my breath until my chest ached. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that seemed loud enough to betray my position. I watched the top of the stairwell, where the sliver of light from the kitchen was being systematically eclipsed. He was descending, one step at a time, his pace steady and terrifyingly calm. I was trapped in the narrow space between the window and the stairs. I waited for the shadow to break the light. The light at the top of the stairs flickered, then vanished. A long, distorted shape began to bleed down the basement wall. It was his shadow, elongated and jagged, stretching across the concrete floor like an ink stain spreading in water. I pulled myself tighter into the corner, pressing my shoulder blades against the rough brickwork until the texture bit into my skin. The shadow grew, inch by agonizing inch, creeping toward the stack of boxes where I stood. It did not move with the frantic energy of a man in a hurry. It moved with the slow, predatory confidence of someone who knew exactly what he would find. The air in the room felt heavy, stagnant, and suddenly devoid of oxygen. I watched the silhouette reach the bottom step, its edges blurring against the damp floor. He was not just descending, he was claiming the space, filling the basement with a presence that felt like a physical weight. My fingers tightened around the handle of the briefcase, my knuckles turning white. The shadow stopped, hovering just feet from my hiding spot. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of his breathing, steady and controlled. He was here. The shadow paused, then shifted. A floorboard creaked directly above my head. I did not wait for him to turn the corner. I lunged for the coal chute, my boots scraping against the uneven concrete. My hands found the iron latch, but it was seized with rust. I pulled, my muscles straining, but the metal refused to budge. A sharp, rhythmic metallic sound echoed as I clawed at the frame, my fingernails tearing against the grit. Above me, the heavy thud of his boots resumed, faster now, descending the final flight with terrifying precision. I threw my entire weight against the window, gritting my teeth until my jaw ached. The latch groaned, a high-pitched protest that seemed to scream in the silence. My fingers slipped, slick with sweat and dust, but I hooked them back into the groove and jerked with everything I had left. The lock snapped open with a violent metallic crack. Cold night air rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt, hitting my face like a reprieve. I shoved the frame upward, the hinges screeching in the dark. I was halfway to the opening, my legs trembling, when the heavy thud of his boots hit the basement floor. He was inside. I froze, my torso half wedged into the narrow opening of the coal chute. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to push through the gap and vanish into the alley, but a morbid, uncontrollable impulse forced my head to turn. I looked back toward the stairwell. The darkness there seemed to pulse. Then, he stepped into the sliver of light filtering from the floor above. Minjun stood at the final turn of the stairs, his posture rigid. The polite, practiced mask he had worn for months was gone. His jaw was set, his lips pulled back in a thin, jagged line that revealed nothing but intent. His eyes, once flat and stone-like, now burned with a raw, predatory hunger. He did not shout, he did not run, he simply watched me, his gaze locked onto mine with a terrifying, absolute certainty. He tilted his head, a slow, deliberate movement that tracked my every tremor. The air between us felt charged, heavy with the weight of his realization. He took a single step down, his boot landing on the concrete with a sound like a hammer strike. The hunt had shifted. He was the predator, and I was the prey. The silence shattered. He moved, not with a rush, but with the terrifying, measured pace of a man who knew the exits were barred. I turned back to the window, my hands trembling. The frame was stuck again, wedged against the damp brickwork. I braced my feet against the foundation, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps that burned my throat. He took another step, the sound of his leather soles hitting the concrete floor echoing like a countdown. I drove my shoulders into the wood, ignoring the splintering pain in my palms. The window refused to budge. I could hear his breathing now, steady and rhythmic, closing the gap behind me. I screamed, a raw, wordless sound of pure defiance, and threw every ounce of my remaining strength into one final violent shove. The wood gave way. The window burst open with a deafening crack, swinging wide into the night. Cold rain lashed against my face, sharp and stinging. I didn't look back to see how close he was. He was right there. I felt the rush of air as he lunged. His fingers grazed the back of my ankle, a cold, sharp touch that sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my spine. I kicked out, my boot connecting with something solid, and hauled my torso through the narrow coal chute. The rough stone edges bit into my skin, tearing through the fabric of my shirt, but I did not stop. I pulled with everything I had, my elbows scraping against the brick, until I felt the slick, wet pavement of the alleyway beneath my palms. I was half out, my legs still dangling in the dark basement, when I heard his breath hitch right behind me. He grabbed my left boot. I thrashed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I twisted my body, digging my fingernails into the mud outside, and yanked with a final, desperate surge of force. My boot slipped from his grip. I tumbled forward, the momentum carrying me out of the chute and into the rain. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring my teeth, but I was out. I scrambled away from the wall, my lungs burning, as his shadow filled the opening above me. He was inches away, his hand reaching into the night, but I was already moving. The wet pavement slammed into my shoulder, the force of the fall knocking the air from my lungs. I didn't wait for the pain to register. I tucked my chin, rolled across the slick, oil-stained concrete, and pushed my palms into the grit to propel myself upright. My knees hit the ground, sliding through a puddle of freezing rainwater, but I forced my weight forward. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. I slipped, my boot finding no purchase on the moss-covered stones, and I windmilled my arms to keep from going down again. I caught the edge of a rusted dumpster, swung my body around the corner, and regained my balance. My breath came in jagged, wet gasps. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't look back at the house. I drove my feet into the dark, narrow passage of the alley. The rain blurred my vision, turning the world into smears of gray and black. I pushed harder, my legs pumping, my focus locked on the distant streetlights. At the end of the alley, I was moving. I was away. I kept running, each step a desperate, frantic bid for distance, putting every possible inch between me and the basement door. The alley was a throat of black, choked with debris and the smell of rotting refuse. I sprinted blind, my hands outstretched to feel for walls that seemed to shift in the downpour. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that drowned out the sound of the rain. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. I didn't look back. I couldn't. To look back was to acknowledge the distance, and the distance was not enough. My foot caught on an unseen crate, sending me stumbling into a stack of metal bins. They clattered to the ground, with a deafening metallic screech that echoed off the brickwork. I didn't stop to regain my breath. I shoved off the wall, my shoulder bruising against the rough masonry, and forced my legs to cycle faster. The darkness pressed in from all sides. I reached the end of the alley, a faint glow of streetlights flickering ahead. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes locked forward. The silence of the night shattered. Behind me, a heavy, rhythmic splash echoed against the brick walls. It was not the random patter of rain. It was deliberate. Someone was matching my pace, their boots hitting the puddles with a calculated heavy thud. My blood turned to ice. I didn't turn my head, but every muscle in my back tightened, anticipating the reach of a hand. The sound grew louder, closer, cutting through the drumming rain. I forced my legs to move faster, though my thighs burned with the effort of the last mile. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps that tasted of copper. I ignored the stitch in my side, ignored the way my vision pulsed with every heartbeat. I threw my weight into a turn, my boots skidding on the slick surface as I rounded the corner into a wider street. The sound of pursuit followed, relentless and steady. My lungs burned with a fire that felt like it was consuming me from the inside out. Each inhalation was a jagged, desperate struggle. I hit the main road, the asphalt slick and unforgiving under my feet. My knees buckled, a sudden, violent weakness that sent me sprawling toward the gutter. I hit the ground hard, the grit biting into my palms, but I did not stop. I clawed at the pavement, dragging my body upright, my chest heaving in rhythmic, painful spasms. Ahead, the blue and white lights of the police station cut through the gloom like a beacon. I forced my legs to move, one heavy, leaden step after another. The sound of pursuit had faded behind me, replaced by the pounding of my own blood in my ears. I reached the glass doors, my hands trembling as I slammed my weight against the frame. The doors swung open. The sudden warmth of the interior hit me, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. I stumbled into the lobby, gasping, my vision blurring at the edges. I collapsed against the front desk, the cool surface grounding me. I had made it. The chase was over. The station lobby was sterile, bright, and silent. An officer moved toward me, his boots clicking on the tile, but the sound was distant. I leaned my forehead against the desk, the surface cold against my skin. My hands stopped shaking. The truth hit me with the weight of a physical blow. He was never a savior. He was a hunter who had tracked my grief for months, waiting for the exact moment I would be vulnerable enough to let him in. The investigation that followed was a blur of statements and evidence. They found the passports, the photos taken from my office, the images of me sleeping in my own bed. He had been a ghost, a man who built a life out of stolen identities and calculated cruelty. I had almost married a stranger. I looked up at the officer, my voice raspy but steady. Maya was safe. She had spoken the truth I was too blind to see, and that truth had broken the cycle. The nightmare was dismantled, piece by piece. I stood up, my legs finally holding my weight, and walked toward the back room to finish the report. I was exhausted, but for the first time in months, the air in my lungs felt clean. The final signature on the statement felt like the closing of a heavy iron gate. I handed the pen back to the officer, my fingers steady. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, a low, constant sound that no longer felt like a threat. Outside, the world was beginning to wake up, but for me, the long night was finally over. I walked out of the station, the morning air crisp and biting against my face. It was quiet, a different kind of quiet than the one I had lived in for months. This one was empty, not heavy. I drove home, the streets familiar and reclaimed. When I unlocked the front door, the house was still, but the air felt different. I found Maya in the living room, asleep on the rug where she had been playing hours before. I knelt beside her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. She was safe. I reached out, brushing a stray braid from her forehead, and she stirred, murmuring in her sleep. I sat there for a long time, listening to the house settle around us. The hunter was gone, the ghosts were banished, and for the first time in a very long time, I was simply home. Days turned into weeks, and the sharp edges of the terror began to dull. I spent the afternoons clearing the house, removing every trace of the man who had occupied our space. I packed his things into boxes, sealed them with heavy tape, and left them on the curb for the trash. Each bag I hauled out felt like shedding a layer of lead. The house breathed again. I watched Maya play, her laughter returning to the rooms like sunlight after a long storm. She was resilient, more than I had ever dared to hope. I sat at the kitchen table, the gold ring I had found on the nightstand now sitting in a small envelope, waiting to be discarded. It was just metal. It held no power over me anymore. I looked at my reflection in the window glass, seeing the strength in my own posture, the clarity in my eyes. The past was a closed chapter, a lesson etched in the bone. I stood up, walked to the door, and locked it. Not out of fear, but out of ownership. My life was finally mine again. I took a deep breath, turned toward the living room, and started our new day. The silence in the house was no longer a void, but a foundation. I looked at the calendar on the wall, marking the dates that had once been filled with anxiety, now just empty squares waiting for something real. Maya was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she helped with the morning meal. Her voice, once a whisper of fear, was now a steady rhythm of life. I realized then that survival was not just about escaping the danger, but about reclaiming the small, ordinary moments that had been stolen. I walked to the window, watching the morning light wash over the street. The shadows were gone. I thought of the man who had tried to define my existence, and I realized he was nothing more than a memory fading into the distance. We were building something new, brick by brick, day by day. The fear had been a storm, but the storm had passed, leaving behind a clarity I had never known before. I held my daughter's hand, felt the warmth of her grip, and knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. The chapter was closed. The future was ours. The finality of our safety settled into the marrow of my bones. I stopped checking the locks every hour. I stopped listening for footsteps that were never coming back. The house was no longer a cage of memories, but a sanctuary we had reclaimed with our own hands. Every morning, I watched the sun hit the floorboards. And instead of looking for shadows, I looked for the light. Maya grew taller, her laughter filling the corners. Where fear had once taken root, we were not just survivors of a deception, we were architects of a new reality. I had learned that the most dangerous traps are the ones we build for ourselves through silence and denial. I would never let that happen again. My voice, once muted by grief, was now the loudest thing in the room. I turned the page, closed the book, and walked into the rest of our lives, step by steady step. The echoes of that night have finally faded into the quiet hum of our daily routine. I often find myself standing in the doorway, watching Maya play, and I am struck by the simple, unvarnished truth of her presence. She is the anchor that held me when the tide of deception threatened to pull me under. We have moved past the shadow of the man who sought to dismantle our lives, and in his place, we have built a fortress of honesty. I no longer look for hidden motives in the kindness of others, but I remain sharp, my senses attuned to the world around me. The lesson was harsh, yet it forged a strength I did not know I possessed. I see the world with a clarity that only comes after the veil has been torn away. We are no longer defined by what was done to us, but by what we chose to do in the aftermath. The path ahead is clear, unburdened by the ghosts of a false past. I take Maya's hand, we step out into the sunlight, and for the first time, the horizon belongs entirely to us. We are home, we are safe, and we are finally free. If you have stayed with us until this final moment, you understand that the story of survival is never truly over. It is a continuous act of choosing yourself every single day. My journey through the dark was not just about escaping a predator, but about reclaiming the authority to define my own life. When we share these truths, we strip away the power of those who seek to keep us silent. Maya and I are moving forward now, not as victims of a calculated scheme, but as witnesses to our own resilience. I hope that by hearing this, you feel empowered to listen to your own instincts, to trust the small voice that warns you when something is not right, and to never apologize for seeking the truth. Your life is yours to protect, yours to cherish, and yours to build. Thank you for walking this path with us, for listening, and for being part of a community that values the strength found in honesty. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we keep the light on for everyone still finding their way home. Looking back, the silence of the house no longer feels like a void, but a space I have reclaimed for myself and my daughter. We have learned that safety is not a gift given by others, but a boundary we draw with our own hands. The man who tried to rewrite my history is now nothing more than a cautionary memory, a ghost that lost its power. Every morning, I watch the sun hit the floorboards, and I recognize the peace for what it is, a hard-won victory. We have replaced fear with a quiet, steady confidence that guides our every decision. I trust my instincts now with a fierce certainty. If you have ever doubted your own perception, let this be your reminder that your truth is the only compass you need. Thank you for witnessing this journey, for your support, and for believing in the necessity of speaking out. Stay vigilant, stay brave, and always remember that you are the architect of your own future. We are finally home. The shadows that once defined my home have long since dissipated, replaced by the steady, honest light of a life lived on my own terms. Maya is thriving, her laughter filling the rooms that were once heavy with the weight of deception. We have learned that our intuition is not just a feeling, but a vital, protective force that demands to be heard. Every day is a deliberate choice to remain present, to stay grounded, and to honor the truth we fought so hard to uncover. The man who sought to dismantle my world is a distant, fading echo, stripped of all influence over our future. We have built a sanctuary of our own making, brick by brick, rooted in the knowledge that we are capable of surviving the unthinkable. Your support has been a cornerstone of this healing process, and I am deeply grateful for the space you have held for our story. Continue to trust your instincts, guard your peace with everything you have, and never underestimate the power of your own voice. As we close this chapter, I want to leave you with one final thought on the nature of resilience. The path to recovery is not a straight line, but a series of deliberate steps toward the truth. We have found that the most profound strength often emerges from the moments we choose to stop hiding and start seeing. My daughter and I are no longer defined by the deception that once occupied our home, but by the clarity we discovered when we finally opened our eyes. We have learned to listen to the quiet warnings that our instincts provide, recognizing them as the essential tools for our own survival. Every day now is built on a foundation of honesty and mutual trust. We have let go of the fear that once dictated our movements, choosing instead to walk forward with a renewed sense of purpose and autonomy. Your presence here, listening to these words, has been a vital part of our process. Remember that your story is yours alone to write, and no one has the right to rewrite it for you. We are finally, truly free. Our story has reached its conclusion, but the lessons we have shared remain a part of our collective experience. By walking this path together, we have transformed a moment of profound vulnerability into a testament of enduring strength. I hope that in hearing these words, you have found a reflection of your own capacity to overcome the shadows that attempt to obscure your truth. The journey of reclaiming one's life is never truly finished, but it becomes infinitely easier when we refuse to walk it in silence. Maya and I are living proof that even when the world feels like it is fracturing, there is a way to piece it back together with intention and courage. Thank you for your unwavering attention and for the kindness you have extended to us throughout this process. It is my sincere wish that you carry this message of vigilance and self-worth into your own life, guarding your peace as the most precious asset you possess. Trust your instincts, honor your voice, and never let anyone dictate the terms of your reality. Goodbye, and may you always find the strength to stand in your own light. As we reach the final moments of this journey, I want to express my deepest gratitude for your presence. Sharing this experience has been a vital part of my own healing, and knowing that you have listened means more than words can express. We have navigated the darkness together, and in doing so, we have reaffirmed the importance of standing in our own truth. Please remember that your intuition is a powerful compass. one that deserves your absolute trust. Keep your boundaries firm, guard your peace, and never allow anyone to diminish the reality you have worked so hard to build. Maya and I are moving forward now, not as victims of a past deception, but as architects of a future defined by our own choices. The strength you have witnessed here is not unique to us, it resides within you as well, waiting to be called upon. Thank you for being part of this transformation, and for standing with us. Goodbye, and may you always find strength. The silence in our home is no longer heavy with secrets, it is simply quiet. Maya plays in the living room, her laughter ringing clear and unburdened against the walls. We have traded the suffocating weight of deception for the simple, honest rhythm of our own days. Every lock is checked, every window is secure, and for the first time in years, the night brings only rest. We are no longer defined by the shadows he cast or the traps he laid. We are defined by the choices we make when the sun rises. If you have listened this far, take this with you. Your life belongs to you alone. Protect it with everything you have. Trust the small, persistent voice that tells you when something is wrong. Stay vigilant. Don't forget to subscribe and join the channel. Turn on the notification and get more new videos.